Alright then, so this is gonna be not a straightforward one. In fact, definitely not a straightforward one, because it's a very small change, it would seem, but it's actually a pretty darn big one. What changes if it had been ready? And of course I'm talking about the 4.7-inch gun. If the 4.7-inch gun had been developed instead of the 5.25, well, instead of the 4.5-inch, not the 5.25, if the Royal Navy had concentrated, instead of thinking it had the 4 inches of backup, and instead of it worrying about all the other options, what happens if it has this as an availability? And, well, it gets rather interesting. It really does. In fact, honestly, it gets pretty darn complicated. Because it's a bigger change than it can necessarily look. After all, what's really the difference between a 4.7 and a 4.5? Well, the fact is, the 4.5, if we put the 4.7 on the same timeline in terms as it was originally, but we make it a truly dual-purpose gun. So it is a dual-purpose gun, the 4.7. And you have to remember it is. What it's not truly dual-purpose is as air defense, because it's designed as a low-angle attack system. So it can't go up to 80 degrees. There's a few other things as well, but broadly speaking, that's where we are. What changes? Well, let's start off with what other changes we're making to actually fit the question. First of all, I had to decide which of the 4.7-inch I'm going to do. Which one? There's the 50 cal, which is fitted to the L and M sort of destroyers. That's a really good weapon. It is a really good weapon. But it's very big to go in all the positions which you want a 4.7-inch to go. Also, it comes on rather late, and honestly, okay, if that came in as the dual purpose, then I suppose the battle class might change. If that worked as truly dual purpose, we might get the battle class entering service earlier, and we might have a change in some of the World War II destroyers, but that's really not going to have a massive change on the whole war. Other than giving them a better dual-purpose weapon earlier on. Which is nice. It's nothing that the Royal Navy and the Mediterranean would complain about. Having the 4.7-inch 50 come in as a dual-purpose weapon that could engage things at high angle, we're talking up to 80 degrees, they would not be upset. They would find a way to cope. Yes, it would be heavy. Yes, it would require power and other things to assist it. But they would find a way to muddle through with that complexity, with that issue. It would be difficult, but they would find the courage to overcome those difficulties. It might be slightly different than some suggest. It might well be different, but they would find a way. So, that is their options. The 4.7-inch 50. Or there is the 4.7-inch 45. Not sure why I decided to flick back then, but it did. 4.7-inch 45. Well, that becomes an altogether far more interesting concept, because while this is not a Trump class destroyer, this is a HMS Kelvin. There is something there with it. There is a lot of ships. There are a lot of ships fitted with a 4.7-inch 45. And if you start off with that as being a truly dual-purpose system, well, that's where you start to get some very interesting changes. Now, before people start coming back to me and go, well, you couldn't do it the 4.7 inch because of versus the 45 because of 4.5 inch and all these sort of things. You can. It's a 4.5 is also a 45 caliber. The difference between them is not that colossal. Okay, yes, it's a 120 versus a 113 millimeter system, but you can manage it. It is nothing that is going to be an amazing obstacle. The question then becomes, why didn't they? Well, that's an interesting issue. And to explain that one, we have to start back to the fact that there is such a wide gamut of weapons in this range in the Royal Navy service. There is everything from 5.5 inch down to 3 inch and various other things being played around in between. When we include secondaries on capital ships, on cruisers, on carriers, on some auxiliaries floating around, there is truly a horrendous number of guns. You have the fact that in the 1920s till the early 1930s, the Royal Navy is pursuing a 5-inch project. It doesn't work out. It doesn't deliver the advantages they are looking for. Now, what are the advantages they're looking for? An improvement primarily over this, the 4.7 inch, enough to justify the cost of the changeover and the handling of the facilities. Because the 4.7 inch in the early 1930s is the gun. Okay. So how do we get to the 4.5 inch? Well, the 5 inch fails. The project doesn't produce the results the British are looking for in it. It produces the results the Americans want, and when you look at the 5 inch gun the British were developing, it's not a massive difference from the American 5 inch guns, but the thing is, it's trying to achieve both. What the 5 inch 38 and the larger 5 inch do for the US Navy, the Royal Navy's trying to get into one gun. And believe it or not, then, when that fails, it splits off into two different avenues of research. The 5.25 inch for the cruiser, to be general purpose for a cruiser, and, okay, right then, we have the 4.7 inch, that's pretty much doing. Oh, we need to replace the 4 inch though. We need a better angle, a high angle gun. Okay, what can we do with that? And that's where the 4.5 starts to come in. So the 4.5 inch becomes this really good general purpose weapon, but it quite literally focuses providing a heavy AA / general purpose weapon rather than an anti-ship / a heavy AA anti general purpose weapon. It's a different orientation, and it's coming from that background. And yes, it is the 4.7 inch 45 that we have to go with. So this is what we're sort of looking at. Now, what are the changes going to be needed to implement it? Well, for starters, if you've gone round the ships which do have some mounts still surviving, and they are rare, don't look at Haida, those are 4 inch mounts. Or HMS Belfast, those are also 4 inch mounts. You will probably have to raise up the gun. This is going to sound strange, okay. So, one of the limitations on the angle the gun can reach is not the weight of the barrels. That's fairly balanced usually with the weight of the breech back here. But the trouble is, if the breech hits the floor or comes in too low, that's a problem. Now, in the nicest way, you're never going to be able to load this gun at 80 degrees. You are not. 50 degrees plus for loading is acceptable. So, okay, you don't need to deal with the breech going on full extension, all the things opening up and being able to maneuver in. So you don't need to raise it up that much, but you are probably going to need to raise it up not necessarily a short distance. I'd say probably 6 inches or so. to get it up to 80 degrees. This is going to have an effect on machinery. You're going to need a far stronger base to hold it in because you're raising in height. You're also going to be dealing with that's going to have an effect on the metacentric height on the ship, because it's not just going to be one gun you're going to have to upgrade. It's going to be all of them. Okay? And they're heavy. Now, admittedly, this is going to cause less of a problem on cruisers, and I'm going to bring you a reason why I'm talking about cruisers in this, but it is going to cause a problem. Now, the thing is, though, it would be a truly dual-purpose weapon. This is where it starts to get really interesting, because a 4.7-inch gun, as a secondary on a cruiser, on a carrier, or a primary on a destroyer, when it's 40.7-inch 45 and is raised high enough, is a truly potentially devastating weapon. It's truly going to provide them with a capability. We all know how well the 4.7s do against other destroyers. We even know how well they do against Italian cruisers. Even Scharnhorst, I think, gets hit by one of them from Glowworm. It doesn't do much damage, but it isn't exactly an enjoyable experience for Scharnhorst. Mainly because she's going... What? Yeah? No, not from Glowworm. It's Hippo gets hit by Glowworm. Scharnhorst gets hit by one from Acasta. These are systems which are capable, especially capable when given proper crewing. And this is another advantage of the 4.7-inch versus the 4.5 and the other systems. The Royal Navy has an abundance of people who are trained to use them. So, 4.7-inch 45. So, the question as I've defined it is replace the 4.5-inch 45 with the 4.7-inch 45 after the failure of the 5-inch gun project. Instead of going, well, we were looking for this to replace everything in a 5-inch, that's not going to work, so we're going to keep the 4.7-inch for the low angle and the destroyers, and we're going to go with a 4.5-inch to provide the anti-air heavy AA / general purpose weapon for our capital ships. Go, okay, let's develop the 4.7-inch. Let's put that in. It's already available, it's already working, we've already got the ammunition, everything set up, we've got the skilled people, we just need to put in the mounts and the turrets. Okay. Alright. This is going to have an impact. What needs to change? Here are the stats. So a 4.7-inch 45, as it's built at this time, has a barrel length of roughly 5.4 meters, has separate loading case charge, has a shell weight of 50 pounds, caliber 4.724 inches, aka 120 millimeters, breech semi-automatic horizontal sliding block, hydropneumatic recoil, elevation varied by mounting, but broadly speaking, minus 10 degrees to plus 55 degrees. Traverse varied by mounting, but normally 360. Rate of fire about 15 rounds per minute. Muzzle velocity 2,650 feet per second, or 810 meters a second. Maximum firing range, this is at 40 degrees, remember, 15,520 meters, or 16,970 yards. Now, the 4-inch 45 is different. And I would note that the maximum firing range of the 4-inch 45 is recorded at roughly 45 degrees, and I think that might well affect the fact it gets a certain extra distance. There can be a big difference between getting that. There's also a few other things going on there. But I think if they put the same work into the 4.7-inch, it I wouldn't be surprised if they could achieve some things going on. For example, the shell weight of the 4.5 inch is 55 pounds. Well, designing a new and better shell for the 4.7 inch, like you design the shell for the 4.5, would not be impossible, and you could therefore give that a heavier shell. In fact, probably that's more easier considering you have a larger caliber to work with. You have 120mm rather than 113, and 7mm might not sound much, but it can make a big difference if you want to make your shell a bit heavier. Also, technically, the caliber of the 4.5 inch is 4.45 inches, or 113mm. Fun times. Breeches for the Marks 1 to 4 was a horizontal sliding block, rather similar to the 4.7 inch. So again, there's no problem really there. Elevation, 0 to 80 degrees. Okay, so the 4.7 inch can go down to -10. 4.5 can go up to 55. The 4.5 can go up to 80. I'd want to keep the -10. I would want to keep the -10 degrees because it's useful, especially if you're dealing with incoming aircraft coming at that angle or dealing with ship engagements. But you're all going to need to find an extra 25 degrees. Rate of fire, 12 rounds per minute for the Mark II between deck mount. Now, between deck mount, by the way, is this one. You can see it on capital ships and carriers. That means the turret is built between decks. It has multiple deck space to do, rather than an upper deck mount. 16 rounds per minute recorded for the Mark III upper deck mount. Again, not too dissimilar to the 4.7 inch 4.5. About 15 rounds per minute, and again, 15 rounds per minute would be fine. If you're dropping from 4.5 to 4.7 and all you're losing is 1 round per minute in your firing time, that's going to add up, but the difference between 16 and 15 means it's going to add up over an incredibly long time. Probably not enough and not quick enough you're going to notice it in an engagement. Because if an engagement lasts 20 minutes, instead of you firing 300 rounds, you would fire 320 rounds per gun. That's not enough that you're going to really worry too much on the scale of things. Muzzle velocity, well, as pointed out, for the 4.7 inch, that's actually higher. So, yeah, it's all looking quite good. Shell weight needs to go up, probably. You can decide whether you want to do that or not. I would prefer to increase shell weight and make it slightly more robust in terms of shell design, but also I would like to use that space to give myself the most effective shell I can. And will that give me an AA height of roughly 41,000 feet? Probably again, yes. I'll probably be able to get 12.5 kilometers up. At least I can't see why I wouldn't. Here's comes interesting when we start to think about the ships affected. And this is where I start to get into the areas where you are most likely going to start disagreeing with me. And please do feel free to comment and discuss this, because this is definitely what-if territory, and it's definitely going well into the what-if territory. So battleships. I've got at least Queen Elizabeth and Valiant affected, but I wouldn't be surprised if more. Because again, and I'm going to say this, I've got Renown listed as a battlecruiser definitely affected, but later on I'm going to have a picture of another battlecruiser and say, well, this one could have been affected by it. There are lots of ships which, if I have a truly dual-purpose 4.7 inch, I'm going to be very tempted to change their weapons fit and start to standardize down. Now, this is partially me, because I am a logistics obsessive who likes the idea of standardizing down to make logistics easier. I like the idea of making my logisticians less murdersome, because I am trying to overcompensate by having lots of different weapon systems. And I like the idea of making my trainers and my qualifications for my crew more efficient by having them being able to focus in on a fewer types. I enjoy all that as a methodology. So I'm going to hope for it. HMS Ark Royal. Well, she has 4.5s, but well, technically 4.45s, but she'd get 4.7s in this. So would Illustrious, Victorious, Formidable, Indomitable. And pretty much every aircraft carrier the Royal Navy fields would get 4.7s. Okay. What impact is that really going to have on them? Probably not much, because the difference between the 4.7 and 4.5 is not going to be enough that I'm going to suddenly see those ships going and engaging other carriers in death duels or something like that. Is it going to have an effect on their air defense? Slightly lower their number of shells used in engagement if you do go from 16 down to 15 rounds per gun. But probably give you slightly better in terms of range. More explosive potential from those shells, just a tad, especially if you do bump up to create a new heavier shell, you know, like you developed for the 4.5. This could be interesting. Scylla and Charybdis, of course, originally have 4.5s fitted, because there aren't enough 5.25s going along, so they would get 4.7s. C&D class cruiser upgrades. Now, this is where things get interesting. Now, they couldn't take the 5.25 turret, and the 4.5 inch wasn't ready, so they get the 4 inch to become AA cruisers, because it can go up to 80 degrees, and they want the 80 degrees. But imagine if you've got a 4.7 inch that could go up to 80 degrees, and you've got double mounts, like you have for the tribals and the destroyer leaders. Okay. So start fitting those to all those ships. Think about a C-class cruiser. Now, as we consider them, Kuroko, modified in 1939, gets 8 4-inch guns in 4 twin mounts. Coventry and Curlow, they had 10 4-inch guns, modified in 1936, in single mounts. If we consider the potential possibilities, again, if we go to, I don't know, Cairo, Carlisle and Calcutta, which are modified 1938-39, they again get 8 4-inch guns in 4 twin mounts. This makes them AA cruisers, which makes them interesting vessels, very capable vessels, but certainly something you want to keep further back, and you have a limit in terms of their engagement capability. You're not really sure if you want them near a surface radar, for example. You probably don't want them near a surface radar, because especially some of the German surface radars are pretty heavily armed. But 4.7 inch gun twins, well, if you're carrying 8 of those, you're carrying the same amount as a tribal class destroyer. And honestly, considering the capabilities of them, and considering you're replacing something which was carrying 5 6-inch guns, well, surely you could maybe mount 5 twin 4.7-inch guns, if you were really incentivized to, because then you would end up with what is in effect a large destroyer. Maybe you do still fit some single 4-inch guns, especially if you consider if you really do want the 10 single 4-inch guns, you know, maybe, but 10 in 5 twins for 4.7 inch would be a fairly nice fit. And again, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of capabilities. And you end up with an asset which is still, yes, an AA cruiser. It's still not something you want to go off and do cruiser duties, really, as the sort of cruiser in frontline cruiser duties. But, well, there is a capability going on here. It does make it more general purpose. It does mean if you've got an escort or a convoy escort, Philip Vian could feel less bad about leaving a convoy with just a C-class cruiser as his escort while he goes off to hunt down Bismarck. And of course, the more of these you produce, the more of these guns, and you will be producing a lot, because the 4.7 inch goes in every single destroyer. So once you have this mount, once you have it developed like this, you are going to be upgrading every single destroyer. Why? Because it will give them the capability of dealing with all air attacks. Now, here is the interesting thing. The Royal Navy has an inkling coming that dive bombers are coming. They are informed by exercises that everyone's going to be focusing on the carriers and the capital ships, so that's why the destroyers can accept the low-angle guns, but they do have a desire for the high-angle guns. If you have a high-angle mount, though, and it's the standardized mount, they will be standardizing across the destroyers and across everything, because it's an easy upgrade to make, and it's something which they already have an inkling. If you look at what they're doing in 1938, 1939, they're already looking at 4-inch guns upgrades, because that's an easy available high-angle gun to stick on other ships to give them high-angle protection, i.e. up to 80 degrees. Now, this conceivably can lead to a lot of ships having such systems. And then this leads me to my favourite what if, really, of this scenario. Because the Abdeel class, mine lane cruiser, 2,650 tons in standard, 3,450 tons fully loaded. A little bit heavier for the later ones. 6 quick-firing 4-inch guns in twin mounts. 3 twin mounts. Now, they are scary when they are armed to engage aircraft, which are the only things which can catch them. And they don't carry torpedoes, they lay mines. But you're not necessarily thinking about them going off and actually engaging in a firefight with anyone. But if they've got 4.7s, which were dual purpose, I could see some Schnellboot, i.e. boats, as they're more commonly called, getting, how do I put this politely, on a dark night in the Channel, them bravely fjording out to try and find the British, and suddenly getting raced up behind them by an Abdeel class going bang, 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 taking them out with radar-guided 4.7s. I could see that becoming a habit. Not necessarily a good habit, because I can think of a few ways of turning that into a very nasty accident for the Abdeel class. But there are certainly some not nice scenarios for various vessels if you have something which can do officially 40 knots in normal and 38 knots fully loaded. Officially being armed with a, well, let's put it this way, 4.7 is a dual purpose 4.745 is not something which you're, well, compared to the lovely, very capable but 4-inch gun, is not really something anyone wants coming up behind them. It's a good way to have an accident with yourself. So Yeah, that's a strong possibility. And pretty much the reality would be every destroyer built from 1930s onwards either has this as standard when it's first built, or would have it backwards incorporated into it. And again, this is not something which is revolutionary. The British were fully prepared to do this. One of the interesting things about the British is they will shamelessly take advantage of their relatively lower cost, the infrastructure they have available. The British do successfully mothball quite a bit of infrastructure from World War One that isn't used in interwar periods. It's not always the best state of repair in the early 1930s, but in 1932, 1933, the Royal Navy starts a program, and by 1933 to 35, Admiral Henderson, the third Sea Lord, who I've talked about a few times, has basically gone around writing massive checks. And I mean absolutely colossal checks to the various owners of infrastructure, including the own Royal Navy dockyards, to get the infrastructure upgraded. This ranges from things as big as armour manufacture plants, which, by the way, if they hadn't been upgraded when they were not have provided not only the armour needed for ships, but the armour needed for tanks and all sorts of things in World War II just wouldn't have been there. Britain would have had to import far more. And one of the things you really want to try and minimise your importing of is armour, because it takes up a lot of space, it has a lot of weight, and it's very difficult to reorganise and reshape once you get it back to the UK. You really don't want to have to import armour if you can avoid it. Now, this does actually have then a consequential knock-on impact, because whilst you're upgrading the plants, they don't tend to work at maximum efficiency, which means you don't tend to have enough armour for your own rearmament program at the same time. So it's not a simple, straightforward matter, because of course, if you take off a plant offline to upgrade it, it's not producing, which means you need to get the armour you need for then, so as not to pause construction from elsewhere. But that's easy to do in peacetime and war. So what's affected? Pick. Anywhere it's affected. This is one of those issues where when we start to talk about something as basic as this, okay, we have to look almost at a scenario basis. And I'm going to limit this to the early war, because everything's going to have a compound effect. As I've discussed before, if you do the simple thing like one carrier, either Courageous or Glorious, doesn't get sunk at the beginning of World War II, that has a knock-on impact. If both of them don't get sunk at the beginning of World War II, the odds are at least one of them, and I would say even if only one of them isn't sunk, the odds are one of them ends up in the Mediterranean with the Mediterranean fleet, especially as they're doing the active operations and need the air support at that time, and they send every spare carrier they can that direction. An extra flight deck at Taranto has a consequential knock-on impact on Italian naval performance throughout World War II, and that's then going to have an effect on the need of the Royal Navy to commit forces to the Mediterranean in World War II, which is then going to have an impact on elsewhere, on what operator forces they have available for the Arctic convoys, on what forces they have available for the Indian Ocean, etc. and etc. So you cannot go too many butterflies down the road. You really can't. The more wings you flap, the more you turn into a hurricane. So you have to start off with looking at really the early scenarios and what is going to be the knock-on impact of this. And let's start thinking about what the knock-on impact is. What is the early killers of Royal Navy ships? Are they lost to a plague of aircraft attacks at the beginning of World War II? Where are they lost? They're lost at Dunkirk. They're lost in Norway, a couple are lost. They are lost, some in the Mediterranean, because of high-angle attacks and because they have nothing to answer those attacks with. Does having something to answer those attacks with automatically save you? In Dunkirk, I don't think so. I think it probably would reduce your numbers of losses, and we'll be talking about this at a certain point as we go on through the campaigns, but it honestly probably doesn't change that much. There's also the fact that it might turn kills into damages, i.e. the bomb, instead of dropping in a position which blows up the ship, the pilot, having been dealing with the heavy AA and the fire of the guns, drops at a bad position, or drops at close enough that it causes damage but doesn't destroy the ship. Well, that means that ship's then going to have to be being repaired, which is going to take resources away from construction, but is a lot quicker than probably constructing a new ship. Which is then going to mean another ship's possibly available for another operation down the road, which means you might have another destroyer. But we also have another big change sitting here, which are my own favourite destroyers from World War II, and in the nicest way, before anyone says what's going on there are other destroyers, I literally have written a book on these. If I want to call them my favourites, I know all their failings, I know their faults, I realise one of the faults is the fact that the 4.7 inch cannot go high enough. This fixes that! Come on! This turns this destroyer into mini Didos in some respects, but here's the thing, the big advantage versus the Didos. Look how cute they are! And balanced! And this is another thing that happens is, well, if this is capable of giving me heavy AA defense, or rather fairly strong AA defense, and I can build as many of these as I can, what am I ordering then? Am I going to just keep ordering repeat tribals? Do I even develop the battle class? Do I, alongside ordering the tribals for the Canadians and the Australians, does the Royal Navy make another big order going, hang on, we're under heavy air attack, we've already got these destroyers which are designed for AA defense because they have 4 of these twin guns which can do dismount. Build them! Build! Do you end up with the L-70, which was basically a tribal with 2 quintuple torpedo launchers? You know, hey-ho, we've got 8 4.7-inch guns which can do the full works, and oh yeah, we also can have a broadside of 10 torpedoes if we want to. If that's what you develop, there you go. So, what impact would that have? If you have a proven design that you just, well, maybe you keep it with this one with just 1 set of torpedo launchers, or maybe you do go for the modified more torpedoes, but probably you would just go with this design because it's going to be quicker to churn out. You've got a proven design. You've got yards already know how to build this because they built one. You can literally go, remember that tribal class design you were building a couple of years ago? Yes. Churn them out now. I mean, literally copy, paste, repeat. I don't want to hear from you till the war's over if you stop building them. Just keep going. Keep going. Afridi is famously sunk by dive bombers because her guns can't bear and she's trying to dodge. And basically the only chance Vian has is to pick whether to take her to port or starboard. This is during the Norway campaign. Well, suddenly you have 8 guns, which can go up to 80 degrees. Dive bomber life becomes very much more problematic. This ship already has 40mm. It has pom-poms. So, this is, instead of these stopping at once they get to roughly 50 degrees, and going, now you're past the guns, we can't do anything about you apart from watch you and dodge. They're going bang, 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 bang. That's going to have an effect on your aim. It takes an already very good design. And I did a bit liner that actually got deleted from the book was, to be honest, there was part of me which thinks these ships, if they'd been fitted with 5-inch 38s, would have been, because it was a truly general-purpose weapon, if they'd managed to get twin 5-inch, would have been given them an advantage. 4.7-inch guns, which could go up, would have been a tremendous advantage. It would have been 120mm that can fire wherever they need to fire. 120mm that can fire wherever they need to fire. And again, you'd have 8 of them. I think it is something to think through. And so I turned to the Norway campaign as the most interesting one to sort out. Well, I don't know how this affects the official the German losses, etc. They claim between 90 and 240 aircraft lost. I would suggest that number of aircraft lost might go up, but I have no way of being sure about that. I can run a software analysis of it a few dozen times. It's going to affect things, but how's it going to affect things? Because everyone's decisions are going to change. The first few attacks show the Germans that they have a capability that once they're through a certain range in terms of dealing with Royal Navy destroyers, then it's down to medium and light AA. It's the heavy AA goes away, and the heavy AA is the scary one. It's not the one which is likely to knock you out of the sky. Please note that I'm not claiming the 4.7 inches is magically going to start knocking aircraft out the sky, but it is the one which, when it goes bang nearby you, causes you to go, "Where?" As a pilot. You're trying to concentrate on your target. You're trying to line up and go, boom! Oh, God, oh, goodness gracious me. That's gone off. Boom! Oh, good Lord, there's another one. And these would be twin mounts, so they'd be going, boom, boom, oh, good Lord, I got bracketed. You know, you could still be flying. You might have shredding on your wings, etc., but you'd still be flying. But it's going to have an effect on your confidence. You're going to go, oh, no, boom! Oh, good Lord, another one. Boom! Oh, no, another one. And that's the point. This is what heavy AA is for. It's not for shooting you down, as I often explain. Heavy AA is about breaking up attacks. It's about breaking up pilots' concentration. It's about breaking up aim. It's not about knocking you out the sky. Well, suddenly these ships can do it. Now, what does it have an effect on the losses of? Well, I'm not sure whether it really has an effect on any cruisers lost. I'd like to think it did, but I don't know, because again, it depends. Do you go through your town class cruisers, maybe your counties and other things, and change the 4-inch guns for 4.7s? I would. I would certainly. It would be a no-brainer. It suddenly gives me something which has a lot more capability and allows me to standardise it. And I think looking at Henderson and also Chatfield, to be fair on this, I have a feeling both of them would unite on that front. They were searching. The 5-inch gun, all sorts of guns are funded as this mythical uniting gun. The 4.5-inch gun. I know from reading the works I've done of Stanley Goodall and all the others, that if the 4.5-inch had been ready in 1938-39, the plan was roll out. Everything gets converted to 4.5. Everything would have been converted to 4.5. And that's a scary enough change. If the 4.5 is ready, then everything gets converted to 4.5 as quickly as they can in 38-39, and probably it would be still going on in 40. You have a massive effect on the Royal Navy, because that is very capable because of its elevation. Well, if the 4.7 can do that, then everything could get the 4.7. So how is that going to have an impact on things? Well, it's going to have an impact on the number of merchant ships sunk, which again has a consequence on convoys because you have more merchant vessels to begin with at the beginning. Okay, yes, out of the 70, I'm not sure. Maybe it reduces it down to 60 that gets sunk. Maybe it takes it down to 50, maybe lower, but maybe it's still 70, but still it's going to be less because of the air defense. When I look through the destroyers, the only two which I could see potentially being saved by it were Afridi and Gurkha. Now, it works for two different reasons. As I was pointing out with Afridi, she's hit by a dive bomb which just lands perfectly and takes her out. Gurkha, of course, famously, the captain goes off and manoeuvres independently to try and engage the aircraft better with his guns, because they're low-angle guns, and he can't engage them at the angle they are, so he takes his ship away from the task group to engage them. He wouldn't need to do that, because his guns could actually go up to that angle. So Gurkha wouldn't leave the task group. Now, admittedly, that means then Gurkha doesn't go away, drawing away all the attacks away from all the merchant ships, and the merchant ships get don't or go unmolested. But then you have the fact that Gurkha will be there, and all the other tribals will be there, and they'd all have higher angle guns. So, do they both get lost? I would say they don't. I would say probably at this point of the war, they don't. Now, what's the consequential impacts? Okay, you have 2 destroyers, not lost, 5 still lost. So the Royal Navy's not saved a lot, really. Maybe some merchant ships get merchant ships go through. What happens to the Germans? Well, maybe they lose a few more aircraft. They possibly lose a few more of their skilled pilots, and the pilots who go on and develop their anti-ship forces and their, Fliegerkorps 10 and all that sort of force. So maybe they lose some of them. This can have an impact on the war. But broadly speaking, it's not a big impact on the wider sort of Royal Navy. But it becomes a big impact when we start to consider the full range of weapons which can be changed by that 4.7 inch being a dual purpose. Because earlier I gave a list of the ships which were fitted with the 4.5s. These are the ships fitted with the 4.5s. Well, if you are changing and are including all the ships which were fitted with the 4-inch guns, well, then you have HMS Gurkha, the L-class destroyer, but she wouldn't necessarily need to be made now, Gurkha, because, well, Gurkha would still be afloat. You'd have Furious, Unicorn. All the escort carriers would have 4.7s. R-class battleships. Southampton-class cruisers. Well, of course, the Town class. All sorts of ships you don't think about could be being modified by this weapon, which then has an impact on logistics. Because now, instead of me having to worry about supplying 4-inch, 4.5-inch, and 4.7-inch, I can supply just 4.7-inch. Okay, yes, my needs to supply 4.7-inch will go absolutely through the roof. But if I have 24 factories producing ammunition, and I have to have 10 of those producing 4-inch ammunition, 7 producing 4.7-inch, and 7 producing 4.5-inch. Then I lose a factory. It's 1 in 10, it's 1 in 7, or it's 1 in 7. If I have 24 factories all producing 4.7-inch, and I lose a factory, it's 1 in 24. It's annoying. I prefer not to. It's going to have a repercussion, but it's 1/24th of my factories. Okay, maybe it's a big one, and so it counts as slightly more than 1/24th of my production, but that's still probably going to be around about 5 to 6% of my production total. It's annoying, but it's not as problematic. So, if we have 2 more tribals available, what do I do with them? Where do I send them? Well, I probably send them to the Mediterranean. If I have 2 more tribals available, where are they going to go? I'd probably send 2 more tribals to the Mediterranean. I send 2 there anyway to reinforce Cunningham's force. Now these ships are capable as AA ships. They are basically like me sending a Dido, but not a Dido, but they've got 4 of these guns that can do all the high-angle attacks. We've got high-angle attacks coming in. They are suddenly my mini Didos, as well as my cruiser, my back-pocket cruisers. They're able to do the AA cruiser role to an extent. And I got C-class cruisers sent there, which also have 4.7 ammunition. Suddenly these ships become very, very useful. These are multi-role, multi-purpose assets. Force K suddenly becomes a whole different bag of scariness. And this is the real point, because if all my destroyers, including the Troubles, but all my destroyers, have high-angle guns at the beginning of World War II, suddenly the attacks in the Mediterranean, whilst they're still probably as dangerous as ever, might well not be as deadly. Because, again, it's BANG! BANG! All off the sides here. I know, I'm probably winding a few people up. I do apologise, but I'm trying to make the point. If you're a pilot flying through, if you can plunge through the flak, and you know it's going to be here, and then the task group is going to be back here, but once you get through it, you then into the light AA, which is tracer, and you can sort of dodge that, see that, you can suck yourself up and think about it. But if the explosions are going to be, instead of being here, are going to be all of this area, that's suddenly holding your nerve for a lot longer. That's dealing with those bangs, dealing with that repercussion, and your nerves holding together for a lot longer, and living in your head, dealing with that for a lot longer. Rather than thinking about an Axis example, I'm going to talk about Taranto, because again, the example that was the Swordfish dive down through the flak, through the AA, below the level at which the Italians wished to fire because they didn't want to destroy the town and start killing civilians, and came in under it to launch their torpedoes attacks. And that is half the reason why the Swordfish have the success they do, because of that scenario. Now at sea you don't have civilians in the way, hopefully, that you don't want to boom. So you can bring your AA right down if you want to, if you have the things you need. It gets even more interesting when you start putting the 4.7 inch on other things. For example, Black Swan class sloops, Hunt class escort destroyers, the Bittern class, the Grimsby class, River class frigates, all of them could be fitted with these 4.7 inch guns. And suddenly that makes them a lot more capable. The V&W destroyers, which are fitted with the 4-inch guns to provide them with the AA defense capability, can suddenly retain some of their destroyer surface fighting capability, because they have the 4.7 inch guns. This is the point. If you have the capability to give them a truly dual purpose weapon, you will. And if you can, then that is good. That will help things. But if you can't, you settle for the AA weapon in an AA-centric war. Operation Claymore here. It's another good example. One of the reasons why HMS Legion goes along with the Tribals is because of the 4-inch guns she brings. She brings the multiple 4-inch guns. They've lost some of their X mounts of 4-inch guns. And this makes her the AA destroyer. Now, this doesn't mean she's a less capable ship. This just means she's not a ship who wants to really get in a surface fight with. She's a less general purpose vessel. She's an AA/general purpose destroyer, rather than being a truly general purpose destroyer. Because of her fit. Because she needs her fit, because of the perceived anti-aircraft weakness of those guns. But if those guns are capable of doing the high-angle anti-aircraft work, and if Legion is also fitted with those guns, suddenly you have a far more capable force, because you go from having, across a force of 4 destroyers, 6 twin mounts that can do the high-angle work, to having a force of 15 twin mounts that can do the high-angle work, which is a big increase in firepower and capability. I think we'd all agree, you'd all prefer to be in a scenario where you have 30 guns that can be dealing with enemy aircraft rather than, well, 12. That is a difference. And that is a force capability. What does it have an impact on Operation Claymore? Well, as I said earlier, Gurkha and a 3D could well survive Norway. Now, there are still going to be ships lost to submarines and probably still be ships lost to aircraft. But, and this is the important thing, but those are going to reduce in terms of the ships lost to aircraft, because of the aggregate effect on the whole force, not just the tribals, but all the destroyers having that capability. But we can't really predict its overall impact. Although it will probably be overwhelming to us if we saw it. If it had happened, we of course wouldn't know what happened. And this also means, this is not to say the Germans will not start responding. Because one of the things we do know is once the British and the Allies get better at AA defence, the Germans start to develop radio-controlled weapons. Now, those radio-controlled weapons might well have been brought into service earlier, which will then have an impact on ships earlier in the war, because they will then be the systems impacting, not the dive bombers. Is that going to affect 1940, 1941? No, it'll probably give the Allies an advantage through 1940-41, but towards the end of 1941, beginning in 1942, that is when I'd start to expect to see the German response. This is one of the problems that comes with predicting the scenario, is, yes, it gives the British Navy an overwhelmingly more capable force when it comes to dealing with the air attack methodology they face. Kill more pilots? No, but will it necessarily throw off a lot more pilots and make them less successful? More than likely. It might well kill more, it might not. It all depends on how the pilots react. But it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on your number of destroyer losses, and it's going to have an impact on the number of your other losses, because of the strength of the force. But there's also another scenario going on here, because beyond the destroyer force there are all the capital ships, which are fitted with 4-inch guns, which are fitted with 4.5-inch guns, which are fitted with all those systems. If you are fitting every single ship with 4.7s, and this is HMS Repulse, she has 3 triple 4-inch guns and 6 single 4-inch guns. If you replace those with 6 twin 4.7-inch mounts because you have them as your high-angle capability, you would then replace the triple 4-inch guns, which are low-angle guns, which are supposed to help them deal with destroyers and smaller surface ships trying to attack her, and the single high-angle 4-inch guns, which are their air defence. You would have a far stronger air defence fit, wouldn't you? Have a far more capable air defence fit. Admittedly, you'd be going down from 15 guns overall to 12, but you go up from 9 guns, which can deal with surface threats, to 12, and you go from 6 guns, which can deal with air threats, to 12. Would this have an effect on 4C? Probably not. If 4C is constituted as it is as it is as we understand it. However, if we go back into the various scenarios where the dive bombers are very successful and are dangerous in Norway, in Crete, etc., and you have more high-angle guns around the fleet able to throw them off, that's going to have an impact on their operations and their capabilities and their likelihoods of successes. So this might take down the number of successes. This might therefore impact the number of vessels available. It might have a very real impact on the number of aircraft available. And the number of aircraft carriers available. Which might mean there's another carrier out with the task group. Or it might mean that they have found, because the 4.7-inch has been successful and has able to cut 8 degrees and is the useful thing it is, they might have started cranking out tribal class destroyers like No Tomorrow because they are AA destroyers, and it's cheaper and easier to build those than AA cruisers like Didos. So they might be focusing on focusing on pushing out the tribal destroyers as well as the Didos. In which case, the Force might not have Didos with it, but it might have had 3 or 4 tribal destroyers with it, with those multiple multiple 4.7-inch guns, which might have then had an impact on the bombers coming in, because it might have helped break up the attacks, which then might have meant, well, as said, I'm not sure about the handling of Prince of Wales. I think they were certainly doing their best, but I don't think they were necessarily listening to the best advice, because they seem to be placing a lot of faith in their guns, breaking up the attacks coming in. Whereas in the case of Repulse, which was dancing around like a ballerina, trying to dodge them all, and did really well right at the end. If you also got it with a group of tribals sitting there with 4.7 inches that are truly dual purpose, well, suddenly that might be just enough that it maybe only gets 1 hit or doesn't get hit at all. It might be scrapes, but it might not get hit. In which case, that's going to have an impact on the consequences of what happens further on down the war in Singapore and around that area. Will Repulse be withdrawn? I don't know. Will she go and sit in Australia? Make Australia feel confident and make people go, well, are you going to really raid Australia? If there's a force there, you're charging out to reinforce that force, but it also might change the number of survivors, etc., from Prince of Wales and all that stuff by having those destroyers there. All these things could be different. We cannot tell. It's a simple change. It's changing a single the mount and design of the 4.7-inch so it can do 80 degrees. It's a single change, but it can have a massive and overwhelming impact. These maps are thanks to Faulkner's War at Sea Naval Atlas, which is an absolutely wonderful book. I do highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, it's really worthwhile. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it as a thought exercise, which is what I thought it through as. I was looking at the evidence, looking at the information, and going, well, what is the likely scenario? What are they likely to do? 4.7-inch gun is a very capable system. It's a very capable gun. It could have been very much more capable with more investment. It would have been it would have received the investment, because if you're not putting the money into the 4.5, if you're putting it into the 4.7, then there's that, and that's where that money goes, and the 4.7 ends up being even better than it was originally. If it ends up even better than it was originally, you have a scenario in your hands. If you have a truly dual purpose, and more importantly, general purpose weapon, which can convincingly engage aircraft at altitude and at distance to break up, well, provide impetus for them to break up their strike groups, to make decisions, to force pilots to be veering left, right, port, starboard, left, right, up, down, to avoid the bangs going on and respond to the bangs. You have a weapon system which can truly replace quite a lot of different individual guns, because it is not that much bigger than the 4-inch that you cannot, especially if you're doing a refit on a capital ship anyway, justify it. Not that much more heavy either. It is already fitted to many destroyers and other ships, so it would automatically be fitted to them, as we understand it, and it would truly make some vessels absolutely terrifying. Abdiel class, C-class cruisers. It's a very easy fix to retain some of the cruiser capability, some of the general purpose capability, while still getting that very high level AA capability. So the question therefore becomes, why didn't they? Why didn't they do this? If it's such a massively advantageous decision, why didn't they? Because it's not the perfect solution. The perfect solution would have been a 5-inch gun. And it wasn't the perfect solution because it wasn't better than all the other specialist solutions. And so they get drawn in by the specialists. By this gun for this scenario, that gun for that scenario. The 4.7 inch is a very good gun, but you can't load it as a high angle at as high an angle as the 4-inch gun necessarily, and you cannot, and this is important with the 4-inch gun, the 4-inch gun is lighter, the 4-inch shell is lighter, smaller, and so it's quicker and more easily handleable by individual people. Therefore, that looks great for the AA, and the 4.5 inch has these options. It looks really good, because perhaps it's going to be the bit of path between the 4.7 and the 4-inch. And it was. And it does become a really exceptionally useful gun. But it's also a bit of a waste of resources. It honestly is, because the 4.7 inch was there. And if people hadn't got as stuck into perfection and aiming for the best, the very best, for everything, they could have got themselves a very useful, very capable gun, which would have given them a lot of advantages for operations. Repulse with 6 twin 4.7 inches. Claymore with far more guns able to provide the reassurance against air attack, although they weren't really attacked by air, but far more capability for also providing fire support to troops ashore and for providing capability against surface threats, which did turn up at one point. Stronger air defense for Crete, for all the operations leading up to it. It doesn't have as much impact as that extra carrier at Trento would, but it has a big impact. It might mean less ships lost, or rather, it might mean ships damaged rather than lost. And that's a win in a long war. It really is a win in a long war when you have ships damaged rather than lost. 2 less destroyers lost, probably. I can make good arguments for why I don't think that in this scenario they would be lost. And potentially a very easy sitting there waiting for solution to the problem of the lack of AA. And there is another option you have that is quite potential here, in that the Royal Navy might well have made the order for these ships in 1939. They could well have turned around before World War II even began, like they did with the Hunts, like they did with the Flowers, have gone, we're short of air defence. Right then, we're ordering Didos. That's not going to be enough. How many yards can build tribal class destroyers? Build them. Because they would be a ready-made solution to the AA gap. Although the AA gap would not have been as so big if the 4.7 inch guns were all capable of high angle. And that is something else to think about. The Royal Navy was already probably the most obsessed and prepared in 1939 of the navies to deal with air attack. I'm not saying it was that good. I'm just saying that on the very low bar they were all at, it was probably the one which was most over that bar in 1939. This would have pushed it to clearing the bar quite comfortably for 1939. For 1945, it would have still looked terrible in comparison. If you look back from 1945 to 39, you'd still be going, oh my lord. But for 1939, it would have gone from just clearing the bar, and slightly higher than the others were clearing the bar, to, hello, very nicely clearing the bar. Still well below the 1945 bar, but it would have been good. And it's I don't want to downplay the difficulty. It would have been an engineering task to do. But it's not beyond the wit of engineers and capability of British engineers to do it. It is not something impossible for them to achieve. We have very good industrial bases in the UK. There are very experienced arms manufacturers. There were a lot of people already building the 4.7 inch and working with that gun. And there are even, to an extent, some designs I've seen in the past which I think which would have fulfilled it. But they were never built, so I can't be 100% sure. It really is just a massive... And the other interesting thing is the potential knock-on effect, because if this one is being built and it's already going up to that level, 80 degrees, there is the potential that they also try and make these guns go up to 80 degrees. Because they don't want to lose their capability. And then you end up with a really interesting scenario with the L-class. I mean, that would have been interesting. I still don't think they would have got mass-produced like the 45s. I think the 4.7-inch 45 would be the sweet spot. But I think the 4.7-inch 50, if it could go up to 80 degrees, would have been something which would probably have caused a fair few pilots to... how do I put this in a polite way? Discover the power of positive thinking. And being very, very positive with their thinking. Interesting ships. Interesting question. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you found it of interest. Right then, so this is some of the stuff we have coming up for January. We have Battle of Coronel in retrospect on the 6th of January. That's going to be the first week live, because it's going to be actually on a Friday, because I've got something come up on the Thursday. And the 1st of January is going to be the first live of the new year. Goodness gracious me. New Year's Day and I'm doing a live. I have a feeling I'll get into trouble with my family for that one, but, you know, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. And that's what we've got coming out with the Christmas topics. This comes out on Saturday the 10th as a long patrol, and I hope you will look forward to the live on the 11th of December. Brew ships. It'll be fun. And I'm going to apologise now, because as I'm recording this, and if you've seen me at all distracted, I am watching out of the corner of my eye the details for tonight's video, which is supposed to be going on the 7th of December, which is the Cresta class cruisers, which I uploaded this morning, processed, was able to view, I watched it through, and then it started processing again. And I have no idea why, and it's saying things like I don't have permission to edit it, and I have no idea what's going on with that one. So, fun times. Thank you very much, everyone. And the question I'm going to give you for this: And the question for this video that's going to come out is 4.7-inch gun is of course the topic of this one. Dual purpose. I'd like you to think about the Italian Navy, and I'd like you to think about the German Navy, and I'd like you to think if there is a similar gun which has the potential to be, for them, I'm also tempted to say the Japanese Navy, because with the US Navy they have it, it's the 5-inch, it does it, okay? So what the 4.7-inch could have been in this scenario, what the 5-inch really was for the US, what guns do you think are suitable for the Italian, Japanese and German navies to turn them into the ubiquitous weapon of everything they need? Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Take care.